What would Trump's anger at Putin over refusal to accept Ukraine's ceasefire mean for Russia? Explained. Donald Trump has said he would impose secondary tariffs on the sale of Russian oil if Vladimir Putin did not agree to ceasefire in Ukraine. Donald Trump said he was very angry at Russian President Vladimir Putin when he criticized the credibility of Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, and has threatened to slap additional sanctions on the sale of Russia oil if he did not accept the ceasefire deal. The remarks mark a change in tone of Trump, who has been open to negotiations with Moscow since his second term began in January. Agence France Presse reported that Putin on Friday called for a transitional government to be put in place in Ukraine, which could effectively push out Zelensky. Nanan Trump argued, in an NBC interview, that any move seeking to replace Zelensky as the leader of Ukraine would inevitably delay the prospects of a ceasefire. If Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on oil, on all oil coming out of Russia, Trump said in a phone call with NBC News on Sunday. Trump had criticized Zelensky, saying he was sick of his handling of the war and falsely calling him a dictator. Nanan Putin said Zelensky lacked the legitimacy to sign a peace agreement. The Russian president has frequently claimed that the Ukrainian government is illegitimate, ever since the 2014 overthrow of Moscow-leaning President Viktor Yanukovych, whom the Kremlin claims had U.S. backing. Putin instead suggested that a temporary administration be set up in Ukraine under the supervision of the United Nations. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, however, rejected the proposal. Zelensky became Ukrainian president in 2019 for 5 years. After which, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Though Ukraine was supposed to have presidential elections in 2024, the country has been under the martial law due to the war. Nanan A bipartisan bill would impose primary and secondary sanctions against Russia and entities supporting Putin's aggression if Moscow does not engage in peace talks or undermines Ukraine's sovereignty. The bill includes imposing 500 tariffs on imported goods from countries that buy Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other products. Joe Biden had banned Russian oil imports shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Since then, the amount of Russian oil imported to the U.S. has dropped to only 10,000 barrels of Russian crude oil and petroleum products in 2023. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. A few of the top importers of Russian oil products include China, Turkey, and Brazil, according to an analysis by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. The Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal behind the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025 said in a press release that the sanctions were hard-hitting because the dominating view in the U.S. Senate is that Russia is the aggressor in Ukraine. Razum for Ukraine CEO, Romanko, said the bill would be a significant step towards ending Russia's ability to fund the war. These measures could deal a serious blow to the Kremlin's fossil fuel revenues, which remain one of its primary sources of war financing, she added. She further said the U.S. must go further and immediately ban American firms, like oil service company Schlumberger SLB, from providing services to Russia's fossil fuel sector. Imogen Pater, UK Friends of Ukraine director, told Newsweek the proposed sanctions and tariffs in the bill would help close the loophole allowing third-party countries to refine Russian oil. Nanan by secondary tariffs, Trump means levying penalties on imports from countries that buy Russian oil. The U.S. has led campaigns known as secondary sanctions, in which countries that trade with a sanctioned country also face penalties. For instance, secondary sanctions are in place against the purchase of Iranian oil or heavy military equipment from Russia. Countries, companies, and individuals that engage in this trade are at risk of U.S. sanctions. Last week, Trump also imposed a 25% secondary tariff on U.S. imports from any country buying oil and gas from Venezuela. Nanan speaking in Ukraine alongside Germany's visiting foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, Zelensky urged the U.S. to ramp up sanctions on Russia after what he said were violations of a ceasefire on energy infrastructure. The Ukrainian president said the U.S. had told Ukraine privately that it had seen the Russian violations. Russia has itself accused the Ukrainians of continuing to strike energy infrastructure, something Kyiv denies. The Ukrainian president will hold in-depth talks on Friday with a small group of foreign countries about contributing forces to a contingent that would act as a security guarantee for Ukraine, as per a Guardian report. As per Newsweek, the House version of the U.S. legislation is also being introduced with the support of both Republicans and Democrats, which will add pressure on Putin. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is likely to continue its push for a deal with Russia in the coming weeks. Nan.